All right, if my internet cooperates, then we have ourselves a class. Okay, today we're going to advance the discussion just briefly on the concept of teamwork and evangelism. And this is a fairly widespread concept in the Brotherhood at this point in time. But when I first started preaching this lesson, teaching it in churches across the country, maybe 20 years ago, it was rather revolutionary in the minds of some people, even though maybe it shouldn't have been. But um, you have two great resources in terms of what God has given to us, and the whole idea of teamwork being one of those is this idea of joint participation, fellowship, working together toward a common goal, partnership, in which everybody is invested as a team. And so, one of the ideas, again, that goes with that God has not only given us the team of fellow Christians, brothers and sisters in Christ with whom to work, but also the world's most powerful evangelism tool, and that is the gospel of Christ. And so, Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 9 says, "Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken." And so, looking at this concept, you have a lot of cooperative ideas of evangelism in the New Testament. We often think of Paul as a one-man show, but we ought not to. He speaks of about 40 co-laborers mentioned by name, particularly in the closing chapters of his epistles. And Rodney Stark suggests that social networks are the basic mechanism through which conversion takes place. And I would argue the same thing, that very rarely does one person in total isolation from everybody else convert just another person in total isolation from everybody else. I think one of the benchmarks of whatever success that I've had in evangelism over the decades is being able to route an individual with whom I'm studying into companionship with other Christians, or an awareness into a worship assembly, into a Bible class, into a small group, into some interrelation with other Christians, because the power of the group will inevitably rub off and make its influence felt. And we all have different talents and abilities, and when non-Christians see Christians working together in love and harmony, you have a very powerful 1-2 punch. You've got the power of the gospel that we are all aware of, and you've also got the resources of teamwork, of brothers and sisters in Christ working together. I can remember when I was a student at Florida College, and there was the 1980 Winter Olympics. That was a long time ago. And an amazing thing happened. This was 1 year after the Russian national hockey team absolutely destroyed the Canadian All-Stars. They were the best hockey team in the world. They were widely recognized as the best hockey team in the world. And we didn't send professional hockey players to the Olympics. We sent our amateurs. And an amateur team from the United States beat the most powerful team in hockey and won the gold medal. And largely because they played as a team. There was cohesion, there was teamwork, there was mutual sacrifice, there were role differentiation. And the Russians were outwitted at their own game by a better team. on that one night. And teams have something that individuals don't have: synergy. Um, at a Canadian horse pull, one horse pulled 8,000 pounds, another pulled 9,000 pounds. Working together, they could pull 17,000, right? Would you believe 30,000? Working as a team, they achieved nearly double what they could do working alone. And you think about the individual strands of a rope and how fragile they are before the manufacturing process intertwines them into a strong cord that is nearly unbreakable. So the compounded efforts of many are more formidable than they are in isolation from one another. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their work. And when I was growing up, even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. And so you have the idea of two are better than one. A 60-watt light bulb has about the same number of photons as a medium power laser beam. But in the laser beam, they are concentrated, working together with intense focus. And when teams come together with intense focus on the task at hand, you have this magical thing called synergy in teamwork. And yet, ironically, what adjective is normally used before the word evangelism? Anybody? Personal. And the idea of personal evangelism caught on as a concept in the second half of the 20th century. And I'm not opposed to personal evangelism. I'm not opposed to one on one. I'm not opposed to self initiative, self directed efforts. But the reason that personal evangelism caught on in the brotherhood in the second half of the 20th century is because gospel meetings were on the decline as an effective tool for doing evangelism. And brethren were looking at another concept. Homer Haley wrote a book, Let's Go Fishing for Men, in the mid 20th century. It utilized sales concepts. The one doing the presentation would be the salesman. The person with whom you were studying is the prospect. The product is the gospel. And you have all these sales presentations. It was the day of the Fuller Brush Man, the door-to-door salesman. And so personal evangelism took off as a concept. There would be door knocking, there would be one-on-ones. We had a slogan when I was a student at Florida College in the local church of which I was a part: each one, teach one. I'm not opposed to that per se, and I think there's work for everyone to do, but not everybody is a teacher. And when personal evangelism is taught as the exclusive or near exclusive model for doing evangelism in a church, what would you guess would be maybe the average percentage of a congregation that is actively involved on a regular, ongoing basis, thinking about it every day or at least every week? How can I evangelize? How can I do this? How can I do that with regard to evangelism? How many people in the congregation, percentage wise, are actually super active doing it, even when it's emphasized as a concept? We talk about the 80-20 rule. I would even guess that it would be less than 10%. And so I'm not opposed to personal evangelism. I believe it. I teach it. But as an exclusive model, it falls glaringly short of the goal. And Not everybody is a teacher. One size fits all methodology does not work for everyone. And I'm finding out as I teach multiple young men as trainees that they have different skill sets, they have different propensities, different personalities, different abilities, and I have to do a certain amount of adaptation in keeping with what they want to get out of this program and what their individual skill sets are. And that's not only true of preachers, it's true of all Christians. The hand cannot say to the foot, I have no need of you. There's work to do for every part of the body, if I understand 1 Corinthians 12 correctly. And yet, not everybody is a teacher. And James flat out says that not everybody should aspire to be a teacher, at least in the public sense of using the tongue. Every Christian can teach in a general sense, but in a formal sense, not everybody is a polished teacher in a formal sense. The training is usually inadequate. Again, only 5 to 10% maybe are actively involved on an ongoing basis if personal evangelism is the exclusive approach. We have a much more complex target audience to reach these days. When personal evangelism took off as a concept in the brotherhood in the mid 20th century, there was a shared heritage of respect for the Bible. And you could put the Jewel Miller Tex Stevens film strip series in the hands of Christians, and they could assume that their neighbors respected the authority of the Bible. And they would go through that film strip series. And I wouldn't even recommend that film strip series today, not because there's not good information in it, but because it assumes a knowledge and awareness of certain fundamental principles that absolutely is not true of American society today. But when you're dealing with a much more complex target audience, and you have to deal with questions, you're ready to baptize a person, and the person doesn't even believe in God or doesn't believe that the Bible is the inspired, authoritative Word of God, and you have to back up several notches and deal with those kinds of issues. And it's much more complex in terms of where your starting point is, how to go from A to B to C to, the end of the alphabet in terms of the process. On the other hand, when Christians work together, you have this magical synergy that can come together. And, when personal evangelism and self-directed efforts, which lack this synergy, are the exclusive model, it's like my friend Barry Kircheville, who said, if there's personal investment required in winning people, then there's personal investment required in keeping them and following up with them. And yet, if only 10% of the congregation realizes how much investment is required to convert a person, then only 10% of the congregation will fully appreciate what is required to follow up with that person and won't be invested in that follow-up process. So the advantage of working together, it's less intimidating. You can communicate to everyone the idea, you do what you can do. You have your role, I have mine. You don't have to do this all alone. In fact, none of us do. We'll work together. Number two, you can focus on what you can do rather than what you cannot do. On the football field, a quarterback cannot do what a defensive lineman can do. nor can the defensive lineman replace the quarterback. And the same principle is true of the Lord's work. There's on-the-job training for everyone. One of the things that Talon and Reagan know very well that I'm trying to do with their training process is model and practice what I preach and bring them along sometimes. And in the mentoring process, it's often a 5-step process of I teach, you observe, then we talk. I teach, you help, then we talk. You teach, I help, then we talk. You teach, I observe, then we talk. And then you take someone else with you, and I'll take someone else with me. And we'll mentor somebody else together. You mentor somebody, I mentor somebody. And if I have a team of Christians working with me and I'm doing the teaching, I'm not only teaching the lost sinner what to do to be saved or the promises of God in connection with salvation, I'm teaching my fellow Christians how to do it. And so it's like killing two birds with one stone. I define team, therefore, as together everyone accomplishes more. There is a goose illustration I latched onto some years ago. This comes from a speech given by Angelus Arian in a 1991 talk. Geese are fascinating when they fly together. Fact number one, as each goose flaps its wings, it creates an uplift for the birds that follow. By flying in a V formation, the whole flock adds 71% greater flying range than if each bird flew alone. Lesson: people who share a common direction and sense of community can get to where they are going more quickly and more easily because they are traveling on the thrust of one another. Fact number two, when a goose falls out of formation, it suddenly feels the drag and resistance of flying alone. It quickly moves back into formation to take advantage of the lifting power of the bird immediately in front of it. Lesson: if we have as much sense as geese, we stay in formation with those headed where we want to go. We're willing to accept their help and offer our help to others. Fact number three, when the lead goose tires, it rotates back into the formation and another goose flies to the point position. Lesson: it pays to take turns doing the hard tasks and sharing leadership. As with geese, people are interdependent on one another, each other's skills, capabilities, and unique arrangements of gifts, talents, and abilities. Fact number four, the geese flying in formation honk to encourage those up front to keep up their speed. Lesson: we need to make sure our honking is encouraging. Lesson or fact number five, when a goose gets sick, wounded, or shot down, this doesn't always happen, but it does happen. I was accused once by Russ Bowman of being a false teacher on this point, but he is a goose hunter. But when a goose gets sick, wounded, or shot down, there are times when two geese drop out of formation and follow it down to help and protect it. And they will stay with it until it dies or is able to fly again, and then they launch out with another formation or catch up with the flock. Lesson: if we have as much sense as geese, we will stand by each other in difficult times as well as when we are strong. Now, when you apply all of that to the evangelistic enterprise, I would say that personal evangelism is not a dead end, but that everyone should do what he or she can. Moreover, one person can make a profound difference. Helen Keller said, "I am only one, but still I am one." I cannot do everything, but still I can do something, and I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. I'm in total agreement with that, but it's just that as a team can accomplish more than an individual can. A flock of geese adds 71% greater flying range than if each goose flew solo, alone. And in team evangelism, everyone is challenged to be part of a group effort. Okay, questions or comments up to this point? Anybody have any feedback, questions, or comments? Okay, building on the concept, let's look at specifically some ways in which this might work. Um, Jesus sent out the 70 two by two. Why? Because two heads are better than one. And when one person has a mental lapse, the other person steps in. When one person is weak, the other person is strong. When you have two people supporting one another, you have strength in numbers. You have more courage. You have less fear. You have more reliance on one another. Paul says, Philippians 1:27, only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. So this idea of teamwork in evangelism is certainly embedded in the pages of the New Testament. Give you several suggestions of how teamwork might manifest itself in evangelistic work today. One is a home study suggestion, although you could apply this same suggestion to meetups in a restaurant or a coffee shop. A handful of Christians starts a class at Bob and Sue's house. They have a regular host, a regular teacher. Everyone contributes. They do evangelism together. Over time, interest builds, their class grows. People begin to take interest in the gospel. You have a number of people who are studying the gospel with you, maybe some baptisms even. And then those classes multiply. What was at Bob and Sue's is now at Joe and Jill's, Tim and Martha's, and you have a multiplication of the groups. Homes were certainly used like this in the New Testament. They taught publicly and from house to house. Acts 5:42, 20. I suggest a few minutes of icebreaker, putting people at ease, finding out more about each other, introducing each other perhaps. About 45 minutes of Bible study, 15 minutes of prayer and share time. You go around a circle and ask people what they might ask for in prayer. Then you pre-designate a brother who will make a list and offer prayer for those things mentioned. And those walls of resistance come tumbling down as people during that prayer and share time are witnessing Christians confessing their faith and reliance on the Lord. And intimacy replaces fear. And then you have a little social interaction afterward, maybe eat a dessert together or whatever, cup of coffee. And you have private conversations during that time taking place in which lessons taught in the class are reinforced, friendships are built, and you have some interconnections that begin to be formed with people. The net effects of that teamwork: skilled teachers are trained. You have a teacher and maybe a co-teacher or a mentor and an apprentice teacher. Healthy faith building lessons are taught. Christians have an opportunity to share their faith in a small group. The atmosphere is non-threatening. It's in a home, or in the case of a meetup group, maybe in a restaurant corner or a coffee shop, Starbucks. One-on-one studies are generated. The small group launches several one-on-ones as people get to a point where they want more. This cycle has reiterated itself many, many times over in my experience. Everyone has a role. The Christians working together each have a role. It may be a teacher, a co-teacher, a host, a prayer leader, an inviter, a babysitter of infants, people persons, people with organizational skills, hospitality helpers, organizers, whatever. But people are working together. People who are praying behind the scenes for the success of the group. People who are out inviting other people, but are not actually teaching them. They're simply inviting, and they have a knack for that. And they're all working together. And everyone has a different role, and some people might have two or three of these roles, but we're working together. Everyone is invested. It's an entry point for evangelism. It may be once a month. No one is overcommitted. Faith building lessons are taught for non-Christians, or you could do this once a week for a month. Call it quits after a month and start it up again after a month hiatus or whatever. Great venue for Christians to connect spiritually, but the primary benefit is to win lost souls, to expose them to this open window and raise evangelistic awareness for everybody that's working together, bringing unexpected secondary benefits. There are times when people are checking out a congregation and they know that you have a lot of these kinds of things going on, they're already Christians, and this other congregation option is a congregation that is relatively content with the status quo, maybe stagnant, maybe dying. And these people who are visiting both of those congregations opt for the active congregation rather than the passive, content congregation. And so you're not only winning non-Christians, you're winning other Christians who want to be involved. And you're attracting those people like a magnet because they want to be with the active, growing, vibrant congregation rather than the stagnant, dying, dead congregation. And there are many types of groups. You can have affinity-based groups, geographical groups, topical groups, age group targeted groups, young people or the old people, or affinity groups are the best. People who want to work together regardless of background, regardless of age, regardless of demographic identity. Because when you have people that want to work together and naturally gravitate toward each other, it's like picking that dog or kitten out of the litter. The one that likes you is the one that you like, and people tend to gravitate toward other people of common interest and background. And I would encourage people who enjoy working together to work together and to go out and invite people that would enjoy those people. And you can launch all kinds of groups in a congregation, multiplying teachers every step of the way. I teach, you observe, then we talk. I teach, you help, then we talk. You teach, I help, then we talk. You teach, I observe, then we talk. And then we both go out and teach someone else or mentor someone else. You have evangelism teamwork using the building as a venue. You have a special gospel meeting just for visitors, a special visitor day with visitors in mind. A great message, great preaching, great singing, all keyed to the same theme. Inviters, friendly greetings, diligent follow-up efforts, fervent prayers, warm hospitality, cross-advertising to other compelling venues. Every guest is a VIP, genuine Christianity on display. When we did our How We Got the Bible Day, we had 300 visitors because we pulled together. And we did a weekend meeting with Ralph Walker a few years ago, actually some years ago now, and we did this and made an outstanding effort and had 35 visitors from the community, something like that. And but when's the last time you do a gospel meeting and have 300 visitors? It can happen if you all pull together. I showed you a card with this some years ago, the Vestavia Church in Birmingham, Alabama. He knows his ABCs. How about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? We did a thing on in December one year in Santa Clara. Why did my Savior come to earth? We de-emphasized Christmas as a holy day, and we emphasized not so much the birth of Christ, but the bigger question of why he came. That's applicable 365 days a year and not just one day a year. And we sang that song in connection with the sermon preached that day. Now what? Is there an instruction manual? There are a lot of themes that you could build on when the congregation is pulling together for a special event. You could do prayer teams where you have evangelism groups meeting once a week for a couple of months, getting together regularly, talking about prospects, and I'm working with prospect A, B, and C, and you're working with prospects D, E, and F. And I want you to pray for my prospects. I'll pray for your prospects. And here's the progress I've made in the month of September. And what do I do now that it's October? What do you suggest my next step might be? And you tell me about your prospects, and I'll give you my input and my help in any way, shape, or form that I can give it. And then when they finally come to the church building or they come to a venue where we're both there, you'll have your antennas up and I'll have my antennas up, and we'll work together to win them. Now, before we finish this up, I'm going to throw this question out to Talon and Reagan in particular, but to everybody on the call. What is required of a preacher when you're thinking about doing these kinds of projects and this kind of mental thought process of collective approaches to evangelism versus individualized approaches to evangelism? What extra effort is involved on the preacher's part in shifting that shifting those gears from personal evangelism to team evangelism? Don't all speak at once.
You have to be the one to invite other people in to share in what they see as your work, I suppose.
Yeah. You have to somehow make your work their work and make it a shared work. So, in terms of coordination, motivation, organization, you have to be several steps ahead of everybody else in terms of how do I get people on board in everything that we're doing together so that it's not just my work, that I'm building a team rather than going solo here. And if you're building a team, you have to talk about what we're doing rather than what I'm doing. And you have to start well in advance and talk everybody through every stage of the process. You have to get buy-in. You have to paint a picture and tell them why it's so important and see who wants to participate. You have to coordinate, you have to mentor, you have to teach, you have to organize, you have to follow up. And there are several orders of magnitude where your efforts have to take on a new dimension of mindfulness of what everybody else's part might be, and motivating them and following up not only with the non-Christians you're studying with, but with your fellow believers so that everybody's on the same page as a team. So it requires much more coordinated effort on your part in getting everybody on that same page. Hope that makes sense. Um, and so it's not just showing up and teaching class. It's building that cohesive teamwork in which people are willing, able, and highly motivated to work together. And when you accomplish it, it's like the mustard seed, and you have this explosive growth. Momentum builds slowly and gradually at first, and you have little to show maybe at the beginning of the process, but the potential down the road is exponential. So it's like the power of compounding. Would you rather have a penny a day or a penny doubled and then doubled again and then doubled again for a month? If you take the penny a day, I mean, a dollar a day even, or the $10 a day, you have that penny doubled, and it's you're going to have an exponential growth eventually that is absolutely dynamite, and you have the ability to ignite a congregation, change the culture of how that group thinks about everything. And when you get more than 5 or 10%, when you get 60 or 70 or 80% or more, all working together toward that common end, common goal, the whole culture of the congregation changes. Everybody gets their antennas up. Everybody's looking out for opportunities. Everybody's praying together. They're working together. They've got their eyes open together, looking at the fields that they're white for harvest, and they're doing it together. And so you're not a solo act. You're kind of an orchestra conductor in which you're building a team or a coach, building team cohesiveness in which a number of disparate parts come together and are working toward that common goal together. And for a preacher to help be the catalyst of that kind of work, you have to enlist some very influential people in the congregation to be totally on board with you, or it will never fly. And when those influential people are totally on board with you, then slowly you reach out to other people who gradually help you build teams of people that eventually cause the congregation to explode. And you have conversions that will end up almost inevitably. They may take time to materialize, but eventually you build up momentum in which the work that you've done over time is like a snowball effect. All right. Questions or comments? I could tell you a lot of stories of things that have happened over the years that have grown out of these kinds of arrangements, but our time is about up, and so I'm going to let you go, and I'll talk privately with Talon and Reagan a little bit more about some of these concepts and what is required of you as a preacher to make them happen and to launch certain efforts in the congregation. And we'll do that. But any final thoughts? Okay, I'll leave you with that. And sorry about my internet problems. They were totally out of my control. It's just like the internet was on and then it wasn't. And oh well, that happens. Okay, take care. Have a good one.
Thanks, Mike.